All right, Shabbosai, good morning. Good morning. We're going to start. The microphone's going to kick on in just a moment. But let's begin, Emirz Hashem, with thanking all of our sponsors for this morning's share. To thank our Talmud Torah sponsors for the month of Elul. To thank Jerry and Sarah Walaski for dedicating all the Shemar Drushos this month in the Schus of Refuah Shalema for Zechariah Dov Ben Perel Shira. To thank the Tilson and Wolf families of Eretz Yisrael for dedicating all of the Shemar Drushos this month in honor of the weddings of our children, and with best wishes for a Shana Tova Umesuka for the entire shir. To thank Shani and Avram Kelman of Eretz Yisrael for dedicating all of the Shemar Drushos this month in memory of their beloved parents and in the schus of all those who need a refuah shalema. And to thank Mrs. Selma Wolf for dedicating all of the Shurim and Drushos this month with immense gratitude to Hashem and with tefillos for health for all in the new year. Beautiful bracha bosai. With that, let us begin. A beautiful, beautiful daf. I just want to give you coming attractions this week. Actually, tomorrow, we're going to be starting a sugya that is just going to be mind-blowing, life-altering, comprehensively cathartic in every single way. So what I'm saying is see what happened there? All right, so let's today also beautiful daf. Today's daf is Chavches 28. We are picking up on Chav Zayin with Beis. I want to thank Rabbi Richter for giving shir yesterday. So we are picking up at the end of the daf. So the Gemara says, here, second line up from the bottom. So let's remember again, just to orient this a little bit. Thank you. We're speaking about the concept of Gilgul Shvuah. So what's Gilgul Shvuah? Shvuah is an oath. So the halacha is that there are certain things for which a person is permitted to take an oath on, and then there are other things you can't. Let's just give an example of this. You cannot be made to swear regarding a claim on real estate. All right, so if we have a real estate dispute and I don't believe you're pretending I'm making a claim against you, I cannot. Let's keep it easier. I have a real estate claim against Ruvain. I cannot trigger an obligation for Ruvain to take an oath regarding real estate, regarding land. Okay, the Gemara has a whole drasha on that. Gilgul Shvuah says like this. Once you are obligated to take an oath on something, we can essentially cause that oath to devolve upon things which in other circumstances you can never really be obligated to take an oath on. In other words, once you're already swearing, once you're already taking an oath, we can ultimately go ahead and expand the scope of that oath. So for example, if I have a monetary dispute with Ruvain, for example, I tell Ruvain, you owe me $1,000. Ruvain says, I only owe you $500. That is the paradigmatic case that we call modeh b'mikzas, partial admission. What's the halacha with partial admission? Ruvain has to take an oath. So now once Ruvain's taking an oath, ultimately, again, on that $500, we could expand the scope of the oath to cover other things else. So if we did have a real estate dispute, I could say, Ruvain, by the way, I also want you to swear regarding that you don't owe me that land, or whatever else it may be. That's the concept of Gilgul Shvuah. So in yesterday's daf, the Gemara ultimately learned that out from the concept of sota, right? That when a sota, remember, because we actually learned this concept in sota, that when a woman is a sota, remember again, she's suspected of adultery, so part of the way in which she goes ahead and solidifies her innocence is to take an oath. Well, once she's swearing regarding this potential indiscretion, so we can go ahead and make her swear about all other previous potential indiscretions as well. So now the Gemara says, Ashkechan Sota. So now I understand the concept of Gilgul Shvuah as it appears by Sota, the Isura. Now we'll say, second line up from the bottom, 27b. So we'll say, so now remember again, Sota is Isser, right? It's a matter of prohibition. So now I understand the concept of Sota ultimately applies to matters of prohibition, Mamona Minalon. From where do I know that the concept of Gilgul Shvuah also applies by mammon? So for example, like I will say, go back to what I just said before. I go ahead and I have a dispute with Ruvain, right? So how do I know that once we're swearing by a monetary dispute, I could cause that shvuah to devolve upon other areas as well? So Rabbi Shmuel, Kal v'chomer. It's a Kal v'chomer. What's the Kal v'chomer? Here we go. Umas sota. When it comes to a sota, top of Chav Chasamad of 28a, Shelo nitna lihitava be'ed echad. I was saying, I remember again, the sota process cannot be triggered by an aid echad. Right? Cannot be triggered by a solitary witness. It's actually the first Mishnah in Sota. Cannot go ahead and be triggered by a solitary witness, but instead you need two Eidim. Look at Rashi. Top Rashi, Chav Chesam and Aleph. Shlo nitna li tava, shvua shala be'ed echad. Ki darmin al hasam, titzarech shnei Eidim shara'ua shenistira, the Yalif davar mimaman. So as I remember again, how is the Sota process triggered? So remember again, there are two parts. Number one is a warning. And number two is stira, where ultimately, as Reuven warns his wife Rachel, don't be alone with Shimon. Ultimately, again, Rachel goes ahead and violates that warning. She is alone with Shimon. Who sees that she was alone with Shimon? Who sees? Two witnesses. Right? Without two witnesses, you cannot trigger the Sota process. Why? Gzeirashav davar mimamon. Just like Himatzav davar erva. So just like again by Mammon you need two witnesses, so too by Sota you need two witnesses. So by Sota, the entire process is not triggered by an Eid Echad, yet Megalgalin. Yet their concept of Gilgal Shvua, in other words, that once she's swearing about this particular situation, we could cause her to swear about other scenarios as well. Mammon, shenitan li tava be'ed echad. I will say conversely, mammon. When it comes to monetary issues, you can trigger a shvua even through one witness. When can you trigger a shvua through one witness? Take a look at Rashi. Mammon shenitan li tava lashbia be'ed echad intano mana v'kafar lo bekulo ve'ed echad mi'ido shu chayiv lo nishba. Supposed to listen to this case. Reuven goes over to Shimon. Reuven says to Shimon, you owe me $1,000. Owe me $1,000. Shimon says, I owe you $0. This is what we call in halacha, kofer bakol. Kofer bakol. Then what happens? An Eid Echad comes along, one witness comes along and says, no, I know that Shimon owes Reuven $1,000. So what's halacha bosai? The testimony of that one witness triggers a shvua obligation for Shimon. Shneimar lo yokom eid echad beish lechol avon lechol chatos, because the pasuk says one witness cannot rise up against the person for any iniquity or chatos. Lechol avon lechol chatos enakam aval kamu l'shvua. So we'll say here's what's interesting. So watch the Kavachomer. When it comes to Sota, the entire Sota process can only be triggered by what? By what? Two witnesses. Yet we've established that the concept of Gilgal Shvua applies by Sota. Mammon, monetary matters, where you can trigger a shvua even through the testimony of one witness, certainly should be subject to the concept of Gilgal Shvua, which I will say again, which means that so we'll say, which now means that here's what we've proven. We've proven both in the areas of Isser and in the areas of Mammon, the concept of Gilgal Shvua. So once again, what does that mean? Just like by the Sota, once she is swearing regarding this potential indiscretion, we could say, we want this oath to devolve upon other areas of indiscretion, which in and of themselves would not have triggered a shvua obligation. Now we find the same thing by Mammon. Once a person is obligated to swear regarding a monetary claim, what could we do? We can now go ahead and cause that oath to devolve upon other areas which by themselves would not normally have triggered an obligation for shvua, right? So just to give you a simple example of this, going back to the case of Rashi, right, where let's say again, Reuven says to Shimon, you owe me $1,000. Shimon says, I owe you nothing. Kofer bakol. Eid Echad comes along and says, Shimon owes Reuven $1,000. So again, remember, is Eid Echad enough to cause Shimon to have to pay Reuven? No, right? Because remember again, monetary matters, what do you need? Two witnesses. So what does an Eid Echad do? An Eid Echad triggers Shvua. Now, once Shimon is swearing regarding that money, what else could happen over here? So now Reuven could come up with a whole other list of items that he wants Shimon to take a Shvua on. Remember that real estate dispute we had a couple of years ago? Even though normally, again, you can't take a Shvua on Karka, but once you're already taking a Shvua on Mammon, now we could go ahead and cause it to devolve upon other areas. It's an incredible, incredible thing. So the concept in general of Gilgal Shvua is a fascinating one. Well, okay, let's actually go a little bit weiter, and then we'll come back and talk about it. So Ashkechon bevadai. So the Gemara says, so now we'll say, so let's drill down on this a little bit more. So now we see the concept of Gilgal Shvua as it applies ultimately again by vadai. But you know what's okay? Fine, I'll say it now. Listen to this. I'll tell you what struck me. It struck me last night during Slichas a little bit. I'll say, what's the concept of Gilgal Shvua? The concept of Gilgal Shvua is often what happens in life is there are concrete points of entry. And then when you have those concrete points of entry, what happens is it opens your mind to a whole bunch of other things. So for example, what Gilgul Shvuah says is, there's this particular scenario that is going to obligate you in Shvuah, okay? Now, once you're swearing, let's open that up to all of the other areas that could also use some additional resolution through an oath, but maybe would have never generated an obligation for an oath by themselves. Jose, if you think about it, is that not the concept of tshuva? Right? What do we do? What do we do during slichus? Right? We say ashamnu, bagadnu, gazalnu. We'll say, what's the avoda when you're saying ashamnu? What's the avoda when you're saying ashamnu? Ashamnu refers to a particular category of sin. What am I supposed to be thinking when I do vidu? What am I supposed to be thinking? What else did I do? What else did I do? Because so often in life, we tend not to think very deeply about our existence. Right? Most of us, it's just the nature of the human condition, kind of live on a somewhat superficial level. The goal ultimately of tshuva is, Chazal gave us a verbiage, but the goal of that, right, in some of the machzorim, so they have a listing of every single avera that begins with aleph. And every single avera, it's a fem machzor, right? And the averas that begin with beit. What's the goal of it? The goal of it is that vidui, confession, is supposed to go ahead and spark just a process of asking for forgiveness. It's just supposed to get me to think about the things that I do. How often does it happen over the course of a day that I do things, I don't even think about what it is that I'm doing. But then when I take a step back, I'm like, why did I do that? Why did I do this? What's Gilgul Shvuah? Gilgul Shvuah is, there's a concrete point of entry, but then once I have that concrete point of entry, it causes me to think about the rest of the other areas of my life. What's tshuva? What's vidui? There's a concrete point of entry. Ashamnu, bagadnu, gazalnu, dibarnu dofi. But then the goal is, I will say, again, slichas, a person could say every single word and not accomplish the task. And a person could say 3 words, and then their mind is totally opened up to thinking about what is happening in my life, and that's mission accomplished. Tshuva essentially is the same dynamic as Gilgul Shvuah. So the Gemara goes weiter. Ashkechan bevadai, 3rd line down, Chav Ches Amud Aleph. So we'll say, so now here's what's interesting. So now I found the concept of Gilgul Shvuah in a vadai case. Now we'll say, now remember again, what does that mean in a vadai case? Look at Rashi. Ashkechan vadai, shemagalgal in Shvuah tainas bari, bedavar she'ein chayavan alav Shvuah, kigon karkos, o shelo holdib a mixer shemagalgal in im is chayav. Supposed to listen to this. So now, I understand that the concept of Gilgul Shvuah, as it applies ultimately again to other definitive claims, but those definitive claims cannot trigger a Shvuah. So for example, let's just keep going back to, our regular case, right? So now, I have a claim against Ruvain regarding a particular piece of land, right? I have a definitive claim against him. Can that claim generate the Shvuah? Can the claim generate the Shvuah? No, because he can't take a shvuah on karka. So now what does Gilgul Shvuah say? Once I have another claim against Ruvain, which does generate a shvuah, I could have that shvuah devolve upon karka. But the Gilgul Shvuah applies to a definitive claim, what we call tainas bari. How do I know, safek minalan? You both say, this is incredible. How do I know, halacha l'maisa, that once I have a claim against Ruvain and he has to take a shvuah, I could even cause that shvuah to devolve upon what we call a tainas safek, a potential claim. Now what's an example of a potential claim? Take a look at Rashi. Safek minayin, tainas shema kigon shvuas hashutfin varisen shechalku. This number shvuas chalku hashutfin varisen and yochal hashbiov. Listen, this is a great case. Let's say I'm in business with Ruvain. We're dividing the business. Now, both say one of the reasons we're dissolving the partnership is because I don't trust Ruvain. So Moshe David, I'm sorry. Everything is, I'm sorry. Hey, so ultimate, I'm sorry. It's not like a subtle hint about what you need to do. Right? So what's interesting is that's all. So now I'm dissolving the partnership with Ruvain. So I will say, so what do I want to do? I really want Ruvain to take a shvuah that he did not steal from the partnership. Right? That's really what I want to do. The problem is you can't really you can't force a shvuah like that because it's amorphous and ambiguous. Now, here's what's interesting. But if I go ahead and I have a definitive claim against Ruvain, then Gilgul Shvuah says I could cause him to go ahead and swear, even regarding what we call a tainas safek. which is an ambiguous claim. For example, let's just keep going back to the same thing, right? I say to Reuven, you owe me $1,000. Reuven says, I owe you nothing. Eid Echad comes along and says, Reuven, you owe Silber $1,000. What's the halacha in that case? Shvua. So how do I know that now, once Reuven's taking a shvua over a definitive claim, that ultimately, again, that shvua could devolve even upon potential claims? So now I could say, Reuven, remember when we were business partners? I want you to swear, right? When you're swearing now over this, include in that oath that you did not steal any money from the partnership. That's called the tainus safek. So I don't know that Gilgul Shvua applies there. Here we go. So the Gemara says, Tanya, Rabbi Shmuel Silber Omer, Nemra Shvua b'chutz. Rabbi say the Torah speaks about a Shvua b'chutz. B'chutz means outside of the Beis Hamikdash in a regular Beis Din, right? V'ne'emra Shvua b'fnim. And it says Shvua inside the Beis Hamikdash. Now, I will say, what's the Shvua that's taken inside the Beis Hamikdash? That's Sota. That's Sota, right? Because remember, again, the Sota process takes place inside the Beis Hamikdash. And ultimately, again, there is a Shvua that is part of that particular process. Good. So the Gemara says, it says Shvua b'chut Shvua b'fnim. Ma Shvua mura b'fnim asabas safek kivadai. I will say, the Shvua of Sota, the entire thing is safek, right? Remember again, do we know if this woman committed adultery or not? Do we know? No, because if we knew, then what? There's no process, right? In other words, there's no sort of process. Maybe there's a death penalty, right? But again, even if you can't administer the death penalty, there's no sort of process. So just like the shvua that's done inside the Beis Hamikdash is by safek, and they made safek kivadai, af shvua ha'amura b'chutz, asa ba safek kivadai. So to ultimately, again, the shvua that is administered outside of Beis Din is also made make a safek kivada, which means Rabbi say that halacha l'maisa, what that means is that the same way when they administer the shvua to the sota, the whole thing is safek. The whole thing is safek. And you could go ahead and cause the shvua to devolve upon other scenarios that themselves may be safek. So to Rabbi say, outside of the Beis Hamikdash, when you are administering a shvua, you could cause that shvua to devolve even upon safek situations. So Rabbi say, so just to be clear, what that means is like this. We've just fundamentally expanded the parameters of Gilgul Shvua. So Rabbi say, here's what you need. In other words, in order to get Gilgul Shvua started, what do you need? A shvua, right? You need a shvua. Now remember, to be clear, a shvua really is only generated with a specific case, right? In other words, there needs to be a specific claim. Now what we've seen is that halacha l'maisa, once there is a shvua generated by a specific claim, you can now take that shvua and cause it to devolve upon any other scenario, right? Other definitive claims, right? Other vadai claims, other safek claims. That's the power of Gilgul Shvua. And it applies by Isser. We learned that out ultimately again by Sota. It applies by Mammon, by monetary matters from the Kal V'chomer b'Sota. Fine. Now the Gemara says, Ad heichon Gilgul Shvua. But we'll say, how far does this go? So now we'll say, so here's what we know, right? So now, halacha l'maisa, right? Reuven is taking a shvua. Right? He's obligated to take a shvua, and now we've established this. We could cause that shvua to devolve upon a whole bunch of other cases. How far, or in other scenarios, how far can you take it? I was supposed to say. So now, I want, right? So again, I'm the claimant, right? So I'm saying, Reuven, you owe me $1,000. Reuven says, I owe you nothing. One witness comes along and says, Reuven, you owe Silber $1,000. So now Reuven has to take a shvua. Okay, Rabbi says, so Gilgul Shvua says that Lamaisa, I can now cause Reuven to swear about a whole bunch of other things that by themselves I cannot have generated obligation for Shvua. The Gemara says, how far can you go in your claims of Gilgul Shvua? In other words, do I say that once he's swearing, I can make him swear about anything? Or is there some type of limitation? So the Gemara says, Amar Rabbi Yehuda Amar Rav, Damarlei, Hishavali she'ein avdiyata. So we'll say, Rav says you can go as far as saying, Reuven, take an oath that you are not my Eved. Wow. Okay, so the Gemara says, now Bepashtas, we're assuming over here that this means an Eved Kinani. So the Gemara says, so hahu shamuti mishamtinale. They'll say that can't be true, because if you call someone an Eved Kinani, you could actually be excommunicated. Why? But listen to this. This is incredible. Hakori lechavero Eved yebnidui. But say if you call your friend an Eved, ultimately again you're excommunicated. Now, to understand the ramifications of calling someone an Eved, right, is pretty significant, because essentially what you're saying is they're not Jewish. right? They're not Jewish, or they're quasi-Jewish. In other words, what you're doing essentially is you're impugning their genealogy. I will say we are so numb to these kind of things because the truth is, we live in an age of name calling and labeling and all this kind of stuff, with nothing, with nothing. So I would say, but the idea of calling someone a name and saying something negative about someone that impugns their genealogy, that is a very, very serious thing. That could have real ramifications. So therefore the Gemara says, you call someone an Eved Kenani, you're excommunicated, Yebenidoy, right? Mamzer, what if you call someone a Mamzer? But get ready for this one. You call someone a Mamzer, Sovek es Harboim, you get Malchus. Let's say, can you imagine that? Right? How many people do we call mamzerim every single day? Now, granted, we often use it much more as a descriptive term than a genealogical term, right? But lamaisa again, you see about say how careful you have to be how you speak about other people. So you call someone an eved, you're excommunicated. You call someone a mamzer, a malchus. We'll say, watch this, Russia. What happens if you call someone a Russia? Now we'll say, by the way, this is so big. You call someone a Russia, yored Imo L'chayev. Now I will say, this is very interesting. Now if you call someone a Rasha, or really what it means is, if someone calls you a Rasha, Yoret Imo L'chayev means, look at Rashi, you are allowed here, Yoret Rashi Yoret Imo L'chayev, Kilomar, L'zu ein Bezdin Iskakim. Now I will say, Bezdin will not get involved. If someone calls you a Rasha, right, Beis Din doesn't get involved, right? So if you call someone an Eved, Beis Din gets involved, they'll excommunicate you. You call someone a Mamzer, Beis Din gets involved, they'll give you Malchus. We'll say, why? Why? Because those things have genealogical repercussions. You call someone a Rasha, Beis Din doesn't get involved. However, Beis Din does give you a license. Ella, Rashi says, Hu mutter l'snoso. We'll say, this is wild. You're allowed to hate that person. You're allowed to hate the person who calls you a Rasha. V'af parnasaso v'leire le'umnaso. And I will say you are allowed to go ahead and compete with him in business to cause him a financial loss. Now, I will say, now what's going on over here? Now Rashi Bab Metzia explains this a little bit more, and Rashi says, I will say, think about it for just a moment. Reuven comes and calls me a Rasha. So what? Right? What does it matter? But say, here's the issue. From the Isaac Chazal, the issue is people aren't going to want to do business with me. Right? If people think that I'm a Rasha, that means usually I'm a dishonest person. I lack integrity. People are not going to want to do business with me, and this is going to negatively impact me. So because of that, Chazal said, if someone's calling you a Rasha, you are permitted to take proactive steps to stave off any loss. Number one, you're allowed to despise someone, which is an interesting thing in and of itself. That you're allowed to despise someone who calls you a Rasha. And I will say, and number two, you are permitted to take proactive steps to compete with him in business to go ahead and save your own parnasa. I will say, such an incredible idea. First of all, just as an aside, I will say, you see from here, what do you see from here? They say, what's the famous adage, sticks and stones will break my bones, but words will never harm me. You see that's blatantly false. Words matter. Words hurt. Words can damage. Vaharaya, you call someone an Eved, excommunication. You call someone a Mamzer, Malchus. You call someone a Rasha, they are permitted to hate you, and they are permitted to take active steps to go ahead and safeguard their business interests by harming yours. Words absolutely matter. What we say and how we talk to others absolutely matters. So the Gemara says, going back. So the Gemara says, Elo, Amarava. So therefore, Rabbi it can't be. Remember, we're trying to figure out how far Gilgul Shvua goes. So the Gemara wants to suggest that if I have a claim against Reuven, which generated a Shvua, I can even tell Reuven to take an oath that he's not my Eved. That can't be, because if I call Reuven my Eved, ultimately, again, I'm chayiv excommunication. Ella, the Gemara says, Ella Amarava, Hishavali Shlonim Kartali LaEved Ivri. I can make Reuven swear, Gilgul Shvua Katzeh, I can make Reuven swear to me that you were never sold to me as an Eved Ivri. Well, Eved Ivri, Haita Anasam Al Yosihi, Mamona is legabe. Well, say the truth is, saying that someone is your Eved Ivri is what kind of claim? It's a monetary claim. Right? We'll say, remember again, how do you get an Eved Ivri? How does we learn this? We learn these sugyas. How does someone become your Eved Ivri? Generally, it's because what? They owe you money. They owe you money in some way, shape, or form. They owe you money. Say if Rabbi say, if I go over to Reuven and I say to Reuven, I claim that you're my Eved Ivri, that is actually a monetary claim. Well, if it's a monetary claim by itself can actually generate the Shvuah. So the Gemara says, Rava Latame da Amar Rava Eved Ivri Gufa Kanoi. So we'll say, no. Rava goes according to his reasoning because Rava holds, we actually saw this before, Rava holds that Allah Chalamaisa and Eved Ivri is actually acquired by his master. His guf is owned by his master. If that's the case, Ihachi Hainu Karka. If that's the case, I will say then it's the same thing as Karka, and Karka ultimately again cannot generate a Shvuah by itself, but Allah Chalamaysa can be subject to Gilgul Shvuah. So Ma'adatema, what would you have thought? Karka hu da'avdi inshi demizabni b'tzina. I would have thought about it as follows. Karka, sometimes people do engage in off-market real estate transactions, right? And people don't know that real estate has changed hands. In Isa dezabin less like color. So sometimes you could sell real estate. Without anyone knowing about it. Hi, Rabbi say when you buy an Eved Ivri, hi im Isa dezabin. If somebody's selling themselves as an Eved Ivri, kala islay. Definitely people would know about it. And if no one knows about it, that must be indicative that what? That it did not happen. Kamash Malan will say that is not the case. Kamash Malan, that there are cases of Eved Ivri that people don't know about, and therefore Halach Lamaisa, that could be grounds ultimately again of Gilgul Shavua. So you could have a situation where Halach Lamaisa, Reuven is taking an oath regarding one thing, whatever, some type of monetary claim, and then I could force Reuven to take a Gilgul Shavua could say, and also swear that you are not my Eved Ivri. Because according to Rava, Eved Ivri has the status of Karka, so by itself again wouldn't generate the obligation of Shua, but Gilgul Shvua can make Reuven take a Shua that is not my Eved Ivri. Okay, beautiful. Both say Mishnah, really interesting case over here. Kalana said Damim Ba'acher. Now both say the Mishnah, we're going to translate it according to the Havamina, but then the Gemara is going to really turn it upside down. So here we go. Now both say literally translated, Kalana said Damim Ba'acher means any item that is used as an item of value to acquire something else. Anything that is used as an item of value to acquire something else. Now take a quick look at Rashi. Rashi says, Rashi says, Shedarko lisito bidamim kishekonin chayfetz echad v'hashta sahadaytcha dematbea asla shminon kevan shezacha zeh nischai zeh b'chalifa. Now both say, so let me just take a step back for just a moment. The Mishnah is introducing us to the concept of chalipin. Kinyan chalipin. Now we've made mention of it before. What's kinyan chalipin? Kinyan chalipin is literally a flip act of acquisition. Now, the way Chalipin works is as follows. I will say there's a machlokes as to the mechanics of Chalipin. We're just going to go according to Rashi over here. So if you can imagine the following situation. Reuven wants to acquire a cow from Shimon. Okay? So obviously, again, the cow is metaltalin. Metaltalin can be acquired through a whole variety of different ways. But they want to use a kinyan Chalipin. So how would you do a kinyan Chalipin? Reuven would go ahead and give an item, ultimately again, to Shimon. Reuven would give an item to Shimon. Shimon would acquire that item, and when Shimon acquires that item, Reuven acquires the cow. It's a flip act of acquisition. But the item that Reuven the purchaser, ultimately gives to Shimon need not be the value of the cow. It's more I'm not going to call it a symbolic item because it's a legal item, but it's a legal item that is there to affect the flip act of acquisition. Now, the way Rashi understands the Mishnah over here is that the Mishnah is talking about a coin. So what does Reuven do? Reuven gives a coin to Shimon, right? So Shimon lifts up the coin, acquires the coin, and when Shimon acquires the coin, Reuven acquires the cow. That's called a nas. That's the havamina. The Gemara is going to challenge that, but Lamai said that's the way. Right, look at Rashi for just a moment. Rashi says, as it stands now, it sounds like the Mishnah is coming to teach us that a coin could be used as the vehicle for chalipin. So both say, according to Rashi, what it sounds like over here is that the Mishnah is teaching me that money, a coin, could be used as the vehicle of chalipin. and not damim, and not actual money. So in this case, the coin is being used as the vehicle of I could have used the handkerchief, I could have used my pen, I could have used my watch, I could have used a whole bunch of things, but here I'm using a coin. Now what's the chap of this? The chap of this is, remember, so now Ruvain is giving the coin to Shimon. The moment that Shimon takes the coin, then what? What's occurred? Ruvain is the proud owner of the cow. Now he's the proud owner of the cow no matter where the cow is. Right? In other words, so the cow might be still in Shimon's Rishos, the cow might be at another location, but as soon as Shimon acquires the coin, the flip act of acquisition kicks in, and Reuven acquires the cow. So the Gemara says, Kevan shezachazeh nischai zeh bechalifav. As soon as Shimon acquires the coin, ultimately again Reuven acquires the cow. So what's the example? And I will say this is where the Mishnah kind of doesn't make as much sense because what we just said before. But Ketzad hechlif shar bepara. I will say in this case over here, what's happening over here is Reuven owns a cow and Shimon owns an ox. They want to exchange. So what happens? So hechlif shar bepara, o chamar b'shar, or an ox for a donkey. Kevan shezachazeh, once one of the parties acquires the animal, the other's animal, nischayiv zeh bechalifav. Ultimately, again, the other one acquires the exchanged animal as well. So we'll say, so this is kinyan chalipin. Beautiful. Says the Gemara, chalipin, mainihu matbeya. So the Gemara says, one second. So now what you're telling you over here is that chalipin could be affected, kinyan chalipin could be affected ultimately again through a coin. So we'll say, so remember again, I could take a coin which normally has the status of money, and what the Mishnah sounds like, what it's saying is I could use it as an item or a kli of chalipin. Chalipin. There's only one problem with that. Shma mina ma'ber na'aseh chalipin. I guess you'll learn out from here that a coin can be used to affect chalipin. I will say, here's the problem. The problem is a coin cannot be used to affect chalipin. Rashi says over here, Shma mina va'anan kaimel me'perak hazov de'in matbeya na'aseh chalipin. I will say, we're going to see over here, there's a machlokes as to what vehicle. What's the vehicle to affect chalipin? Now, some are going to say you need a kli utensil. Others are going to say that even peiros work. But it seems to be almost unanimous that money, right, kesef, does not work to affect chalipin. You can't affect chalipin with kesef. Again, we'll see as well. So we're going to see. Remember, the paradigm for kinyan chalipin is found in Megillas Rus, right? Shalaf ishna alo. We'll talk about this in just a little bit. So the Maisa, ultimately, again, you can't use kasef. So how does the Mishnah say you can use kasef? Amar Yehuda, what it means to say, kolanishum damim ba'acher. So I will say, look at Rashi. What does he kolanishum damim ba'acher? Says Rashi, kol davar shim ba'lisito damim ba'acher, tzarach l'shumo b'dam, dahanu kol matal tabaran there. I will say, the way to read the Mishnah is like this. Kol hanishum damim ba'acher means anything whose value needs to be assessed when using it in a transaction. So essentially what the Mishnah is referring to is not money. It's not money, because we'll say you don't have to assess the value of money. The value of money stands on its own. The Mishnah is talking about any item that when being used in a transactional way has to be evaluated. What does that refer to? Metaltalin, movable property. Any item, called davar shetzarach shuma, any item that ultimately, again, needs evaluation when being used as payment for something else, i.e. metaltalin. We'll say Amadeus, Kevan shezachazeh nischai bechalifin. See if Rabbi say the Gemara totally rejects it. We thought this whole time that kol na'aseh damim ba'acher, anything that is used for payment for something else, was referring to the use of a coin to affect chalipin. Now the Gemara says, no. Read the Mishnah as kol anishum damim ba'acher. Anything that when used in a transactional setting needs an appraisal or needs evaluation. What is that referring to? Movable property, metaltalin. And what it's talking about is the use of metaltalin to affect chalipin. So I will say, so therefore again, what we're being introduced to, and this is an incredible idea. So again, I could go ahead, I want to acquire something from Ruvain, I could give him an item. And once Ruvain acquires that item, I acquire the item from Ruvain. A flip act of acquisition. And the chap is also, again, it's not an in-kind exchange, right? The idea just is I'm giving Ruvain something. What's the something? The something could have a high value, the something could have a low value. It's just the something. But the idea is Kinyan Chalipin says once Reuven acquires X, then I acquire the other item Y. Dekanami Diktani, again, we'll say Chaf Chesam base 28b. First line in, or second line, Dekanami Diktani, Keitzad, because we'll say this explanation makes a lot more sense. Because remember again, how did the Mishnah illustrate this example? Keitzad, Hechlif Shor Bepara, O Chamor Bishar. But remember again, the Mishnah, when it illustrates Kinyan Chalipin, doesn't illustrate it with money. Right? The money is not being used as the article of Chalipin. Rather, what's happening over here? You're exchanging a donkey, right, or an ox for a cow, right, or a donkey for an ox. And what does the Mishnah say? Once one party takes possession of his animal, the other party automatically acquires possession of the other animal wherever it may be. That is called Kinyan Chalipin. I says the Gemara, third line down, so the Gemara says, my Ketzad. Okay, so fine. We'll say, so now the Gemara asks, but one second, let me ask you this question. Obviously, this whole conversation got started because we thought the Mishnah was talking about the use of money as a vehicle for Chalipin. We thought the Mishnah was coming to teach us that money, a coin, could be used as the object to affect Chalipin. So according to that original reading of the Mishnah, how do you read the rest of the Mishnah? When the Mishnah says Keitzad also usually means the Mishnah illustrates a principle, and then Keitzad is to show you what? Right? Keitzad is to show you the application of that principle. So according to our original reading where we thought the Mishnah was telling us that money can be used as the vehicle for Chalipin, how do you understand the Keitzad? To which the Gemara says, my Keitzad, what it means to say, Peros nami avdi Chalipin. Yet I will say the Keitzad is coming to illustrate something else. The case was actually, so the first part of the Mishnah is coming to teach me, that's what? Money could be used to affect Chalipin. The case is coming to teach you that even Peros, I will say, Peros doesn't just have to mean fruit, right? Peros means essentially anything that's not a Kli and not Kesef. If you're not a Kli and you're not a Kesef, you're essentially Peros. So the Gemara says, in my case, I'll come Peros nami avdi Chalipin. Right? Peros, look at Rashi. Peri nami, kol midi de lo havi kli, peri karile le'in Chalipin. Anything that's not a kli, ultimately again is called Peros. It's called Peros. Avdi Chalipin, Osin Toras Chalipin. Rashi says over here, it's Ketzad, hechlif basar shar bepara, o basar chamar b'shar. So the Gemara changes the verbiage a little bit, whereas the Mishnah was speaking about actually exchanging a cow for an ox. Here the Gemara is suggesting what it means is exchanging the meat. So that's a case of a pri, right? That's a case ultimately again of something that is not kesef. It's not a kli. It's a pri. So what's the halacha? Kevan shezachazeh nischay bechalipin. Once one party right acquires one meat, the other party acquires the other meat. Said Rabosai. The Gemara is doing something interesting over here. So what we just did, let's establish what we've done. We've established the correct way to read the Mishnah. What's the correct way to read the Mishnah? Kol hanishum damim ba'acher. Anything that when used in a transaction usually requires valuation, which means metaltal and movable property, ultimately again could be used to affect Chalipin. Beautiful. And then the Ketzad, then the illustration of the example makes perfect sense. Beautiful. Then I will say, right, that's the Ketzad. But then the Gemara says, one second, according to the Havamina, that the Mishnah was talking about the use of a coin to affect Chalipin. So ultimately, how do you read the Ketzad? According to the Havamina, then, the first part of the Mishnah is coming to teaching that I could use a coin to affect Chalipin, and then the Ketzad is coming to teaching that what? I could use Peros to affect Chalipin. To which the Gemara says, one second. The Gemara says, good, Hani Chal Rav Sheshes Damar Peros Avdi Chalipin. That's fine according to Rav Sheshes, who says that Peros can be used to affect Chalipin. El Rav Nachman Damar Peros Lo Avdi Chalipin. According to Rav Nachman, who says that Peros cannot be used for Chalipin. Ultimately, again, Ma'ikal Meimar. So I will say, what is there to say? What does it mean to say? Ultimately, again, there is money. There's an example of ultimately money that could be used like Chalipin. What's the case? Ketzad hechlif demei shar bepara o demei chamar b'shar. Okay, so I will say this case is a bit more complicated. So the Gemara wants to suggest that there is a case where money could work for chalipin. What's the case? Let's look at the case in Rashi. See Rashi, Ketzad hechlif demei shar b'para. Rashi will say, here we go. Machar lo, here's the case. Machar lo shar b'para. Suppose this is a two-part case as we're going to see. Machar lo shar b'mana. So here we go. Ruvain sold Shimon a shar, sold him an ox for a mana. Fine. And what happens? Umashchi. Then Shimon did Mashicha on the shar. It was like beautiful, because remember again, Bali Chaim, animals can be acquired through Mashicha. Fantastic. Right? So Ruvain sold Shimon. Here's the shar. The shar is 1 mana. Fine. Shimon goes in and does Mashicha. He acquires the shar. But V'nischayev lo zeh hamana. Now remember again, Shimon didn't pay up yet. Which means Shimon owes Ruvain a mana for the shar purchased. Fine. Amar lo amocher. So both say, so now that's transaction 1. Transaction 2. Ruvain says to Shimon, Yesh lecha para litin b'damim. Now, so both say, after Ruvain sold Shimon the shar for $1,000, and Shimon did Mashicha, but didn't yet pay Ruvain. So now Shimon has an outstanding debt to Ruvain for $1,000. Ruvain says to Shimon, by the way, I'm in the market for a cow. Do you happen to have a cow? Amrale, hey, right? So Shimon says, yes, I have a cow. Shema lo b'mana. And Abba says, how much is the cow? Amazing. How much is the cow? Take a wild guess. $1,000. Amana. Right? Amana. So the Gemara says, so Amrale, hey, Shema lo b'mana. O bifras. Amrlo mocher. Amrlo mocher ashar harei amos sha'ata chayiv li nisun l'cha b'dameh nisun l'cha. So I'll say now, Ruvain wants to buy the cow from Shimon. So what does Ruvain say to Shimon? Shimon, here's the deal. The money that you owe me should now go towards the cow. Right? Remember, Shimon owed Ruvain $1,000 for the purchase of the ox. Now Ruvain wants to purchase a cow from Shimon. So Ruvain says to Shimon, the money that you owe me for the ox should now go towards the cow. So we'll say, now watch this. The Gemara wants to suggest that the Havamina, or the Gemara is suggesting that money that Shimon owed Ruvain, ultimately, again, now allow Ruvain to acquire the cow, even without Mashicha, through Chalipin. One more time. Ruvain sells Shimon an ox for $1,000. Just use $1,000 to have a mana. Right, $1,000. Fine. Shimon takes the ox, does Mashicha. Acquired the ox, but still owes Ruvain $1,000. Ruvain says to Shimon, I'm in the market for a cow. Do you have a cow? Shimon says, yes. Ruvain says, good. How much? $1,000. So Ruvain says, the $1,000, Shimon, you owe me for the ox, should ultimately count as the payment for the cow. So the Gemara says, such a case like that money actually becomes a vehicle of Chalipin, and ultimately, again, Ruvain automatically acquires the cow even without Mashicha. Wherever the cow may be, he acquires that cow through that money acts as Chalipin. Incredible. So we'll say that's the idea over here. Sometimes money can work like Chalipin. My time, what's the reason for this? And we'll say, why should this work? We'll say, we actually mentioned this before. Because in its essence, he holds like Rabbi Yochanan. We'll say, what does Rabbi Yochanan hold? Rabbi Yochanan holds that midda oraisa ma'os konos. And we'll say, midda oraisa, money allows you to acquire movable property without taking possession of it, without mashicha, without mesira, and nothing. Or when you pay for something, you acquire it. So why did Chazal step in? Umay tam amru mashicha kona. So why did Chazal say that no, we don't allow money to acquire movable property, but rather you have to do mashicha? Gzeira shemayomru lo nisrafu chitacha ba'aliyah. So I'll say this is actually a really interesting idea. So let's take a step back. So Rabbi Yochanan himself holds that halacha l'maisa midoraisa, money acquires movable property. So why did Chazal step in and say the only time you acquire movable property is when you do mashicha, when you actually take it in your domain? Because Chazal were concerned about the following thing. Well, so imagine the following scenario: I go ahead and I purchase wheat from Ruvain. Okay, $1,000 in wheat, but I own it, but I didn't yet take possession of it. A fire breaks out in Ruvain's storehouse, and it destroys $1,000 of wheat. what do you think Reuven's going to say to me? What do you think he's going to say to me? I'm so sorry for your loss. So sorry for your loss. Your loss. The $1,000 in wheat that was destroyed was yours, and you were already the owner of it. Chazal were concerned that if money affected complete acquisition, and the property was still in the domain of the seller, and the seller experienced some type of loss, he would allocate that loss to the purchaser's property. So what Chazal essentially did, Rabbi say, is they created a certain sense of buyer protection. How do they say buyer protection? Your money does not acquire movable property. You know what acquires movable property? You're taking it into your possession. Only once it's in your possession is it yours. Which Rabbi say means something very interesting, which means that if I paid Reuven for wheat, and there was a fire in Reuven's storehouse, and it destroyed $1,000 in wheat, Reuven cannot allocate that loss to me. That's Reuven's loss, right? It's not yet mine until I go ahead and I take possession of it. So that's why Chazal stepped in. So the Gemara suggests over here, Milsa de Shchicha Kazu B'hu Rabbanon. The rabbis will say only went ahead and were gozer this in normative cases. Milsa de lo Shchicha lo Gazi B'Rabbanon. But Rabbi say in uncommon cases, Chazal not gozer. Rabbi say what's an example of an uncommon case? The example of the uncommon case would be the case we just mentioned before, where Reuven sold the ox to Shimon. Shimon owes Reuven $1,000. Reuven then purchases a cow from Shimon for $1,000, and Reuven says, the money you owe me ultimately, again, should go towards the cow. That is an uncommon case. That's a milsa de lo shricha. So because it's a milsa de lo shricha, an uncommon case, you can actually use the money to go ahead and affect chalipin. Because we could even go back to the da'oraisa that says ma'os konos. Chazal said ma'os not konos, only in regular cases. But in abnormal cases, money could still go ahead and affect acquisition. Incredible. But what about Reish Lakish? Reish Lakish is of the opinion that halacha l'maisa, so ultimately Mashicha, the concept of movable property, being acquired only through Mashicha, ultimately is a pasuk. I will say, what's the pasuk? We actually started last week's daf. O kano miyad amitecha, something you acquire from the hand of your friend. Reish Lakish says the only way to acquire movable property mid'oraisa, ultimately again is through Mashicha. So the Gemara says, what does he do? How does he acquire? How does he understand this case? Hanicha isar l'krav sheishes. So it makes sense if he holds the krav sheishes. Tamar peros avdi chalipin, who holds that peros could go ahead and affect chalipin. So matai is krav sheishes. The Isarla Krabi Gamliel, Krabi Nachman, sorry. Damar Peres Lavdi Chalipin, Omapea Lo Kani B'mai Kani. But if he holds ultimately Ayala Krabi Nachman, who says that Peros cannot be used as the vehicle for Chalipin, and a coin cannot be used for the vehicle of Chalipin, how would he set up this case? It has to be ultimately, again, that he must hold like the particular case of, or like the particular approach, ultimately Arav Sheshes. Stay Rabbi say, halacha l'maisa, we emerged from here with a number of things. Number one, Rabbi say, we paskin that for Chalipin, ultimately you have to use a kli. You have to use utensil. Now, it doesn't necessarily have to go ahead and satisfy the typical definition of a utensil. In other words, usually a clean halacha mitzvah has a base kibble, a receptacle. You don't have to use a receptacle, but the idea is you don't use money for chalipin, and ultimately, again, we don't use peros for chalipin. So it has to be ultimately, again, something that we would call a kli, ultimately goes ahead and affects chalipin. That's how we pass halacha l'maisa. I will say, number two, we do accept this concept that mid da'oraisa ma'os konos. Really, mid da'oraisa, ultimately, again, money affects the acquisition, ultimately, of metaltal, a movable property. But Chazal stepped in and said, no, you don't acquire movable property until you take physical possession, and that is because of buyer protection. But again, halach l'maisa, Chazal only applied that principle in normative cases, but in non-normative cases, so you could find situations where ma'os konos, where money ultimately again would acquire. Incredible, I will say. Let's go weiter. Mishnah. I will say this is an incredible Mishnah. Rishus gavoa bekesef or rishus ahedyon pechazaka. So I will say this is interesting halacha. Hekdish acquires things through money. So I will say this comes on the heel of what we just said before, right? We just said before that for our purposes, money does not acquire metaltalin. Money, right? What acquires metaltalin? Mashicha, Masira, right? That acquires. But for Hekdish acquires items with money. Or Rishus HaHedyot bechazaka. But ultimately, we'll say again, Rishus HaHedyot means a regular person acquires stuff only with chazaka. We'll say, what does chazaka mean? Some type of proprietary act or act of ownership. Similarly, the Gemara says, Amirasa legavoa kimisirasa lehedyot. Ultimately, we'll say, when you pledge something to the Beis HaMikdash, a pledge, an amira, ultimately is binding. As binding as kimisirasa is giving over something to another individual. So we'll say here the Mishnah is contrasting the power of kinyan by hektish as opposed ultimately again to regular mundane transaction. We'll say, I think also in this Mishnah there's a very profound yesod. If you look at these words, Rishus HaGavoa, we'll say, how does one go ahead and enter into the Rishus of the Ribono Shel Olam? Right? Isn't that what I want? I want to be in Rishus Gavoa. I want to be close to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. How do you enter into Rishus Gavoa? B'kasef. We'll say the lashon of kasef is the same lashon of kisufin. Kisufin means yearning, right? Kasef is money. Kisufin, right? Kisufin is yearning. How does one enter into Rishus Gavoa? How does one enter into the Rishus HaGavoa? How does one, like David HaMelech says, I have one thing I want in life. Shifti beveis Hashem. I want to live in the house of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Va'ani kirvas Elokim li tov. The only thing I want out of life, is I want to be close to, the Malbim asks on that pasuk in David Hashem Orvishi. David HaMelech says, I want one thing. Shifti beveis Hashem. To live in the house of closeness. But says, David, that's it? You only want one thing? What about health? What about parnasa? What about shalom bayis? All the things we daven for. The Malbim says, David HaMelech understood, if you have closeness to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, everything else falls into place in life. So how do I get Rishus Gavoa? How do I become close to HaKadosh Baruch Hu? Say, it's yearning. We spoke about this in the Chassidus Chabur on Thursday night. The power of yearning. The power of wanting something is so incredibly powerful in the eyes of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. You want to come into Rishus Gavoa? Kasef, yearn for it. Now I will say this stands in contradistinction, Rishus HaEdyot. See, I will say, in the Welt, in the world, if you want to accomplish something, what do you need? Chazaka, an act. I will say, imagine you show up to work, right? And you sit at your desk the whole day playing Tetris. You don't want to play Tetris anymore? I don't know. All right, fine, whatever. Solitaire. Right? You sit the whole day playing solitaire, right? And your boss comes over and he says, "What's going on?" He says, I just want you to know, I might be playing solitaire, but I have an incredible burning desire to work. I just want you to understand, really? In my heart, I want to be operating on all cylinders. I'm not, but I just want you to know what my yearning is, right? They'll probably be told to yearn on the other side of the door, right? So let's say it's the big distinction between the mundane world, and Kiddusha. You see, Rishus Gavoa, Rishus HaHedyot is chazaka. In the world, Rabbi say, success is only defined by one thing, which is results. If you don't produce results, you're a failure. That's it. It doesn't matter. I tried so hard to seal the deal. That's great. Did you get the deal done or not? If you did, you're a success. If you didn't, you're a failure. There is no A for effort in the mundane world. It's all about results. And here is a distinction between the physical world and the spiritual world. In the spiritual world, it's all about effort. Because in the spiritual world, there's an acute understanding that I don't control the results. In the mundane world, we fool ourselves, we think we control the results. So again, in Rishus Gavoa, how do you get there? B'kesef. It's all about yearning. Or Rishus HaHedyot, in the mundane world, b'chazaka, it's all about results. Similarly, Amirasa Ligavoa, in the world of Kiddusha, simply articulating a desire to want to do something is so profound. When a Yid tells the Ribono Shel Olam, I want to be a tzaddik, I want to be holy, I want to be righteous, my behaviors are not there yet, my lifestyle is not there yet, but I want you to know what I want. Amiraso legavoa. You make an amira to gavoa, That's Misirasa Lehedyot. Rabbi said in the physical world, mundane world, you tell people what you want. Here's my goal. Here's my aspirations. Fantastic. That doesn't matter. What matters in the physical world? Mesira, transactions. We'll say in the physical, mundane world, what matters is results. What matters is transactions. Your yearnings, your she'ifas, what you want, matter for absolutely nothing. What you produce ultimately, again, determines your success. In the world of Kiddusha, Menachem, I saw you already. Just come in. Hey, it was a good try. Hey, so, just come in. Hey, so the Gemara says, in the world of Kiddusha, in the world of, you wanted to be caught. You could have come in the back. You could have easily come, right? In the world of Kiddusha, let's say in the world of Kiddusha, ultimately, again, it's your amira. In the world of Kiddusha, it's your yearning. In the world of Kiddusha, it's the articulation of your desires. That's what matters most in the eyes of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. We'll say, is that Mishnah not a gift? On the first day of Slichas, we'll say, this is what it's all about. It's about ultimately, again, yearning to be something greater. It's about saying to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, here's what I want to be. Here's who I want to be. Even though I'm not there yet and I may not get there for a very long time. I know that in the world, it's all about results. In the world, it's all about transactions. But with HaKadosh Baruch Hu, it's all about yearning. And it's all about articulating who you want to be, what you want to be, even if you're not there yet. Says in Tana Abanan, what does it mean that ultimately, again, so the Beis Hamikdash acquires back Kesef. Gizbar Shanasan Mavs Behema. So we'll say, for example, a Gizbar, right? So the temple treasurer goes ahead and pays money for an animal. Afilu Behema B'Sofa Olam, even if the animal is on the other side of the world. Kana, ultimately, again, Beis Hamikdash acquires it. Ubehedyot Lo Kana Achim Shoch. So we'll say that's a very profound distinction, right? So again, Beis Hamikdash pays money. Once he pays money, Beis Hamikdash acquires the animal wherever it is. But a regular guy pays money again. As we said, Dvar Torah, even though we money doesn't acquire livestock, only Mashiach does. It was an example ultimately again of Amirasal Gavak Misrasla. Jar HaOmer, Shar Ze Ola. Person says, this ox is an Ola. Bayis Ze Hektish. This home is Hektish. Afilu B'Sofa Olam Kana. Even if the ox is on the other side of the world, even if the home is on the other side of the world, Beis Hamikdash acquires it, Behedyot Lokana, top of Chavtes, Ad Shiyim Shoch V'Yachzik. But ultimately, again, I will say, by Hedyot, by a regular individual, again, you don't acquire it either until you do Mashiach by an animal or a Chazaka by a home. So we'll have to stop over here for today. Incredible sugya, I will say. Again, I think what I'm going to do actually, I will say if it's okay, I'm going to ask you to do some homework. Because it's Sunday, it's a long day, Baruch Hashem. Tomorrow we are starting the ridiculously amazing Mishnah of Kol Mitzvos Haben Ala'ab, sugya of Kibbutz Ve'im, another sugya. So we'll say, so if I'm going to ask you just to do the rest of the sugya up until the Mishnah for homework. Again, I believe in you. I would say, but again, the bottom line, just to understand, it's just simple illustrations of the previously articulated principles, namely the fundamental distinction between hektish and hedyot. Ultimately, again, hektish acquires everything with kesef. Hedyot needs formal kinyanim, either chazaka by real estate, or ultimately, again, mashicha by movable property. Ultimately, again, by hektish, even just pledging something conveys ownership to Hektish, but ultimately, again, by regular transactions, you don't acquire it until there's a formal key. And I'll say you'll see all the examples of that. We'll start at the Mishnah tomorrow. Shkoyach.
Thank you so much. Okay, really appreciate it.
It's great to see you. It's supposed to have you here.